That's the way anybody online, I see that, only anybody else.
Only is it, right?
All right, we will call the City of Bellevue Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order Monday, June 16th at 5:30 p.m. Brian, let's do roll call
Alrighty, Chairman Kurtz,
here.
Commissioner Lindberg,
Here.
Commissioner Beazer.
Here.
Commissioners, Hughley and Rudfeld are absent.
Notice of agenda compliance, finding that the regular meeting and notice of agenda were posted in accordance with Idaho Code 74204 within 48 hours prior to the meeting at the City of Bellevue City Hall, Post Office, and the city's website on June 11th, 2025. I have a motion, this meeting was adequately noticed.
I'll move the notice for this June 11th, 2025 regular meeting was completed in accordance with Idaho Code section 74-204. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, call for conflict. Anybody have any conflict?
Nope.
Agenda time?
None.
Public comment, any comments, for items that are not on the agenda tonight?
I'll just let the council know that, the comprehensive plan had their first meeting, yes, it was a public meeting. Kind of just syllabus week, just kind of talked about the process, but it seems like a good group of community members, so yeah, excited to get that kicked off.
Nice.
All right, great. And is there more new members since that was the article came out in the paper, is there?
I don't believe so, it seems like the original group.
Okay. All right, good, feel good about a good cross section of the community.
Yeah.
All right. Great. When's the next meeting scheduled?
I don't think we established our next meeting, we talked about how often we would like to meet, and I think it's gonna be a bi-monthly. Yeah, a bi-monthly meeting,
Sometime in August.
Yeah.
BBD.
yeah, so the first phase of just collecting data is sort of starting to kick off, so. Not much work to do yet until we have something to work with.
Yeah, okay. Right, Brian probably has a lot to work.
Yes, well, yeah. This is a lot.
Okay, great, yeah, thanks for the update. Okay, approval of minutes from the May 19th, 2025, regular meeting.
I move to approve the May 19th, 2025
Yeah.
regular.
For the consent agenda as one motion.
Sure. Hope you guys don't read that. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Perfect. I move to approve the consent agenda for the Monday, June 16th meeting of planning and zoning.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
My motion passes. Okay, to new business. The Beans and Brew Coffee on 749 North Main Street. Application for design review. Able to construct a 1,700 square foot coffee shop with a drive-through at 749 North Main. Brian, do you wanna
Yeah.
kick off that?
Sure, so yeah, as stated, this is a application for a coffee shop with a drive-through service. At 749 North Main, which is wedged between the Atkinsons and Family Dollar stores. At the north end of town, it is zoned business, which allows restaurants as a permitted use, so this is only a design review application. Per code, there is no public hearing required for design review. And so 1017.5 states a building which is allowed by right in its title may be reduced in bulk, height, and other physical dimension by requirement of the commission only found necessary to protect health, safety, and or welfare. So like I said, this is the permitted use. You guys are open to adjust it to make sure that it is not going to create hazards for the community, and that it meets our design criteria. There's a whole slew of them. The main ones that I want to focus on tonight are concerns regarding pedestrian automobile traffic, this is, predominantly going to be a morning operation, just as coffee shops tend to be. And our prevailing traffic pattern is people heading north in the morning, south in the afternoon. I mean, since this is on the west side of the street, there's going to be a lot of left turn movements. ITD did provide comments, stating that a traffic study would be required if more than 100, trips. Or peak hour trips or 1,000 daily vehicle trips are generated by the use. No estimates from ensuing traffic generation or traffic engineers or anything like that was provided, so we don't know for sure what the peak hour or daily trip count would be anticipated for this. And then, so that was that one. Then the other item of concern was the snow storage for the site. This is located at a higher elevation, and then there's a pretty steep drop off at the rear of the lot, into the Chanterelle subdivision. So one of the concerns is that the snow storage, at least a portion of it, is going to be stored at the top of that bank, and, there's potential, if it is not carefully done, that it would create runoff, issues and potentially damaging fences and things that snow would be pushed up onto, below the hill. The applicant did not provide any, topo survey or anything to that effect. So we don't know exactly where that top of slope is and how it can be effectively mitigated, or if there's adequate space for the snow storage that they are proposing there. The building design, is a single pitch, kind of sloping to the back of the building. There is potential that the runoff and melt from that could affect that rear sidewalk, but simple gutter would fix that, so I'm not really that concerned about that. And then just the total snow storage is also of concern. The applicant has provided a revised one, I don't know if I sent that to you guys or not, snow storage plan that is almost entirely on site. It leaves 3 parking spaces, including the 188 parking space. Unencumbered in the winter time, which is the minimum parking requirement for the size of this use. Like I said, it still encroaches a little bit onto the neighboring property, and the portion of the top of the bank is enlarged prior to the compared to the version that was in your guys' meeting packet. And snow hauling is only a permissible use or alternative to providing it on site if there's not currently. Or if there's currently building on site or something that would be preventing fitting snow on the current property, which is the blank lot, so it's not, that is not an applicable option. And so my recommendation for tonight is to ask questions, provide feedback to the applicant, let them know what information you guys may want to see, definitively show that he's compliant with the, design criteria and our code.
So you say there was a new snow storage plan?
Yeah, let me pull it up here. Come on. So close.
No. Excuse me, but could you share that?
I'm getting
By the Zoom? Thank you.
Alright. This is the snow storage plan that was sent over recently. The area is in dark gray, keep the snow storage. Again, this portion is enlarged, we don't know exactly where the top of bank is relative to the snow storage, there is a note. You zoom in. There's a note that states it is not to disturb, Chanterelle subdivision phase 2 to below this. And then this has also been added, kind of the rear of the building, that concerns the gas meter and air conditioner right here. Pushing snow up against those two utility structures and the building itself may cause damage in future. And then, yeah, the remaining is parking and a little bit of landscaping. No trees are gonna be pushed up against it, but there's 2 parking spaces worth, so 400-ish square feet that would be on the adjoining property, which the applicant also owns.
And so you're saying that with snow hauling, since there's a building not on site currently, snow hauling can't be considered?
So the code language is where snow storage areas cannot be provided on site because of existing buildings or approved building design, an adequate snow hauling plan shall be submitted for and subject to approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So snow hauling is a alternative only when it is necessary because of existing buildings or for designs.
Oh,
On the
okay, so we could allow snow hauling. If we have pre-designed,
Right.
as it's goes through design review. We approve whatever design that is, right?
Since you're operating with a blank slate, snow hauling is not an option. Alternatives would be to reduce the amount of asphalt. Really, I think that's about the only option as far as numerator and denominator of 1/3 of asphalt area.
Right. Okay,
Are we aware of what Atkinson's and the dollar store where their snow storage normally falls? I can't quite think of what it looks like during the winter, but for some reason I have it in my mind that this currently empty lot ends up in snow storage for the other businesses. Is any,
I don't.
I did include the snow storage plan from the original entitlement of the Family Dollar
okay,
before they were expanded. So it was generally along the front 2 rows of parking. Out here. The expansion just had a note that said, will continue existing snow storage or something to that effect. As far as Atkinson's, I did not, but I would not hold any potential snow trespass onto this property against this applicant. Beyond Atkinson's to figure out
for sure.
an alternative.
Yeah. Like Atkinson's just like in those, and that, and well, which is now where they put those EV stations.
Yeah.
Also not.
But they have
so
space
right now.
off to the north.
Mm.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Yes, we could go ahead and have the applicant make that, presentation or to kind of speak to some of these concerns as well, so assuming you're the applicant.
Yeah,
If you could just state your name, for the record and then for yours.
okay, I'm Ryan Lund. There is it's like the whole thing, Atkinson's, Family Dollar, and all those are managed by an HOA, the Bellevue Business Park, and they're the ones that, push all the snow and everything. So there is a reciprocal easement that's pretty much any of the parking spaces can be used for any of those businesses to store the snow or park or to go through or, wherever. So pretty much it's like a full parking lot for all the businesses to share, kind of. But to the city code, we gotta make sure it's met, the required amount of snow storage is met, and we've met the 1/3 rule, so I think I was over there just barely, and I think if we just put up like maybe like a retaining wall or something along that back, maybe that would take care of the concern there. And then I was talking to my civil engineer about it too. If we put that retaining wall along that back, so we can push the snow and nothing's gonna go over, 6 feet or whatever. We put a 6 foot high wall, concrete wall that's reinforced and everything. They can push snow up there and then we'll slope it down to a drain that's hooked into the other drains, and that should take care of the issue if that's something we could do.
Okay, anything else in your, application, that you'd like to highlight or point out as we start to go through the design review process?
Yeah, we're just wanting to get something going as fast as we can before snow flies. We wanna be dried in and wanna get the groundbreaking going and just try and hit it before the snow flies. I know there's stuff that we've gotta get approved and everything, but we're just trying to be flexible in what we can do to help the city and provide a good business to the town of Bellevue.
Thank you. So Brian, looking at this, how would you recommend, looks like we've got the executive summary and then the project analysis. What would be the most efficient way to kind of go through this? So we don't miss anything, but yet also go through it, efficiently.
So I think starting on page 18, there's the required findings code sections, which is 1017.5. I don't particularly want to go through each of the 30 some odd, one line by line, but if you guys want to just read through those, and then as questions may pop up in your head, blurt them out.
Okay. That sound good to you guys?
Yeah.
I guess, Brian, are you aware then, of the HOA simple storage?
I've not seen any, like, agreement itself. I've seen a plat note on one of the variants of the business park subdivision, to that effect. Okay. Specific terms may exist elsewhere.
Well, that's there, that's something that you could get a copy of and review, right?
It should be recorded, right?
Yeah, ideally.
Or if you can't find it, I can send it to you.
Yeah, probably be easier.
So I'm still not an ace at reading photometric studies. It seems like that satisfied the requirements. Of our code, maybe, since you didn't highlight it.
Yeah, so all the lighting is proposed to be downcast. Yeah, there is just a tiny bit of light trespass onto the Family Dollar side of the parking lot boundary. But I do not see that as a concern.
Yeah.
I guess with the new updated, snow storage plan, that does get us, to our, required square footage, numbers.
Assuming it is actually feasible, given site topography and such.
Mhm. I definitely don't have as many concerns with seeing the updated plan. It's definitely an improvement on what is in our packet. It does look though like retaining walls shall be discouraged.
Yeah.
So as far as putting a retaining wall at the back of the property, probably not the most desirable. Solution. But, it would be great to see the. Agreement for that area, because if it is part of an HOA and they're kind of managing the whole parking lot site. That definitely quells a lot of concerns I might have. Cause obviously this is traffic related, so the entirety of this lot will need to be fairly clear for it to operate efficiently. In my mind, so. Yeah, if that entire property spanning those multiple lots have an agreement to kind of move snow around that will. I know it's a requirement to show it for this particular property, which I think is an improvement. But yeah, some of those concerns, initial concerns, I'm not as worried about. But it'd be great to see that documentation of it
Sure.
from the
Yeah,
HO.
let's send it right now.
Is there a way, Ryan, we can bring up like a Google Earth image or Google, so I'm just curious, I've never like looked over the edge to see what the backside of that, on where
Mhm.
chanterelles, like if there are homes right below that, or. Yeah, definitely have homes right below that.
Yeah. These are 2 foot contours you're seeing here, so. This fence line is approximately 6 feet. Below the top of bank up here.
Looks like that, lot 261 does not have a fence, or
I don't believe
a.
it does.
There. Yeah, no, I could see that concern with the water flowing down there. And then, of course, with you know, retaining wall or something that built up and you're looking up at something that wasn't there before, and so that I kind of go to that retaining wall shall be discouraged. And
Would do just a lower one or something?
well, that's where I don't wanna get into get into the negotiation and be like the armchair engineer as far as what that should or shouldn't look like, but I think that's something that needs to be
And I
expanded.
think for clarity, retaining walls are generally. Below the surface of the
Yeah,
higher side of the grade.
yeah,
If you go above that, then a fence. There,
No fence.
right, or
I could be open to the idea of a fence.
subsection C, under landscaping, the design of fences, walls, and retaining walls shall harmonize with the site and buildings in scale as well as in materials.
And I know a lot of those buildings have fences behind them in existence. Yeah,
so it wouldn't be adding anything new or different to then the character of what.
But you guys are just thinking to keep it from being pushed over, but not necessarily
if we're
melted
worried
down.
about that, yeah, the melting down is hard to avoid.
But then also if you're living down there, what you're looking up at.
Mhm.
Good point. While we think about that, I do have a question. I'm looking at C1. The sheet C1 with the plan that shows like how the cars come in and they just go around the building. And then come out. I'm wondering what's the plan, like, where they, how they exit the parking lot, so when they come through the drive-through. And go all the way around on the south side, where then do they come out? Is it in between these two, like, medians here, or is it back this way?
Either way, yeah,
But you know, guys don't have a sign that like directs it a certain way.
we can paint on the ground or whatever.
I was thinking about, item 11. Sorry, under the code sections of 10-17-5, so on page 19. Number 11 with, safe and adequate and efficient pedestrian access with like the vehicles. Like parking right here. And then like going this direction to access the front, but then the drive-through is coming out there.
Yeah, right across traffic cone.
Yeah, yeah, I do have a concern about that, ingress and egress for vehicles, because I know the current kind of dirt lot almost acts as
Mhm.
negative space and no one's driving along that. But people do tend to whip into that entrance, either heading straight towards Atkinson or kind of going south once they enter. So I would like to see a slightly better plan for traffic management, because I think that once that whole space is paved, you'll have people driving from Atkinson's in front of the coffee shop, in front of, right in front of Dollar General. And if people are also entering, trying to head for the coffee shop, I could see some near misses and not so near misses.
Yeah.
For pedestrians and animals alike.
Yeah,
So just like some stop signs and like
Signage or painting,
crosswalks and arrows and.
I'm not
Yeah.
quite sure what the solution is for that. I don't want a bunch of curbs everywhere, but.
Well, and I do want to kind of piggyback on that a little bit is. Right now, I mean, people either park in Atkinson's or they park at the Family Dollar. And so there's not a lot of like cross. People don't rarely kind of cut across that dirt lot, but then maybe,
I pick up something bad.
but then once it gets paved and used, then they will. But then also, the thing is, that's not built into this at all is pedestrians. And it's like, okay, if you're gonna park at one place, you're gonna walk to another, there's no like safe routes to the coffee shop, so to speak.
No,
So-
or even has it stands now, like, if you park way over there to like go back over the was walk out, but like, in there.
And if I'm understanding correctly, this has, it has a drive-through element, but otherwise this is a cafe and there is seating inside
Yeah,
the building. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a 10-foot sidewalk out front that we were planning on lining up with the 10-foot sidewalk in front of the Family Dollar.
Okay.
And then have a crosswalk from the front of our sidewalk, right where over to the Atkinsons, over there. They have an overhang on the front of theirs. We could crosswalk over to that, and then we're gonna crosswalk across the drive-through on the south side over to the Family Dollar front
Okay.
sidewalk. Just to generate, cause when we were doing the expansion on the Family Dollar, there was a ton of pedestrians walking, just
Mhm.
constant all day, so. That's kind of playing to that, is just to make sure we can. Have somewhere safe for people to go, and like, I've been talking to the civil engineer, I'm sorry, we don't have like a full blown set. Yet, we're just kind of trying to get the basic design through, and then. We'll turn in a stamped civil. Full set of plans and stuff for the review from the state or wherever you guys get it reviewed from. But. Yeah, we'll totally have like a traffic pattern sheet and everything that will show all the line painter guys where to paint all the lines and. To kind of direct the traffic, but you guys are saying that you kind of want to not go between those two islands to the south on the Family Dollar expansion lot. Right there.
Well, that's what I don't wanna pretend that I'm a traffic engineer. And a design person, so I personally wanna refrain from telling you what to do or how to do it, but I think it's worthwhile to, more than just seeing how they're gonna. Get queued up and then get into their coffee and then leave, yeah, then off of the highway into there, but then one of the things that I do have a wonder about. If you get, so what happens when you get 10 cars queued up? And then you can't drive from, you know, from Family Dollar over to Atkinson's and to get out onto the highway, there could be an interesting bit of congestion there that I don't know what the solution is, but I could foresee something, some challenges there.
Which I think though is why, like, I'm just gonna point with my finger. So if they're coming in here, right, off the road, drive around the building, that you'd actually want them to go out this way. So then they have a proper turn into the exit lane there, rather than coming out here and then, like you mentioned. They turn left to then go out this way, then they could hit backup traffic on the coffee shop. Or be cutting in front of the parking where pedestrians might be parking to walk right here.
Yeah.
So it's like you guide like with little, arrow signs that you see at drive-throughs, right, where it's like enter here. And then as they're coming out, it's like exit right,
Oh, okay,
shroop. That way,
perfect.
it seems like where they run into the least amount of pedestrian crossing. But
Oh, you also have like a half island there.
Yeah, something that,
Which would be,
this will be extended, but something else I wanted to point out,
Yeah.
these two entrances. Are currently unstriped, unmarked, and well wide enough to be entrance exits. Which would be two very close together. Right, left turn, full access points. So potentially having those delineated as one in and one out. I think
Yeah. Well, occasionally you see people going in and out the end.
Yeah, so
It's a free for all. Yeah, I don't know who manages that section, is that, that's under Atkinson, or that's who's. Manages that section of, traffic, but it is, can be confusing.
mhm.
and just to clarify, you said that the building front, so before the sidewalk line up with the other building, and then the sidewalks are intended to line up as
Yeah.
well.
And then with painted cross.
Painted crosswalks,
Okay.
and then, like the pedestrian signs and everything will have put up.
Okay.
How close or how far is from the edge of the project here, like on the drive-through, how far is Atkinson's building gonna be from that?
On the north side,
Yes, cause it basically goes up against. The,
it should be at least 5 feet away from,
okay, so it like fills it in.
yeah, cause. There's a 5-foot setback, I think, from the property line that we had to be away from our property. And then they've got their, so it should be 10. I think there's a party wall of 10 foot.
Yeah, I definitely like the crosswalk, proposal, the painting between the two. Surrounding buildings to make it more pedestrian friendly. That's
And the
good.
one to the Atkinson will have to angle pretty good, but
Yeah, it's,
just as long as cars don't park in that section to allow, and then we'll have to have a drive-through. From Atkinson's down to Family Dollar as well that we keep open, just to limit the cars, but from the. From the front of the building around to the window is a 10-car queue. And so anything after that is. Hopefully we don't, I mean, I hope we get tons, but not anything over that's unsafe, out onto the main street, that'd be bad.
well, that does kind of then go to the question of, what was it, ITVs, was it? 100 vehicles per. Or,
And I did want to clarify that is the 100 vehicles, that is visiting the business within an hour,
in peak.
within
Right.
peak time, okay.
yeah, 100 vehicles, that's a lot of vehicles.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
of coffee.
Go.
I'm imagining, but one thing that would be helpful for us to maybe understand and to put into context is. other businesses of this size, you know, how much business, you know, can you do at a peak hour so that we can better determine, okay, is a traffic study, further traffic study required or needed, or are we gonna be well within the, that limit?
I will look that up and get it.
Uh,
That's a good question. The maximum number of copies made in 1 hour.
Yeah.
Well, of course, you can have, you know, 4 people per car, I guess, but.
Right, yeah, that's.
But you could, I think then
In the
judge-
drive-through.
yeah, in the drive-through, yeah, and then also including the walking traffic, I guess, because car's a car, whether they're walking in or driving.
Parks, yeah.
That could be helpful, because I've certainly seen, I mean, Dutch Bros is a very common, popular chain. And I've seen it cause some issues, with people not realizing maybe how popular the business was gonna be.
Right,
And I mean, certainly this isn't the only coffee shop in town. But yes, it would be helpful to have those numbers, to get an idea, cause that northbound traffic is pretty intense. And having streams of cars coming in the morning could be somewhat disruptive. I'm not super concerned about that. But I would like a little bit more data just to feel solid about the decision.
For sure.
Does anyone have any concerns about the like physical design? I guess.
Get to that for sure. I was looking first for the stuff about just the mechanical equipment and the screenings.
Mhm.
I'm just not sure what it is. I assume there's like venting on the roof. Is there?
Oh,
Like
yeah,
mechanical
there'll be
equipment on the
plenty,
roof?
penetrations up through the roof. The actual furnace and everything, we're not doing a rooftop unit just because of how much snow and how much damage it can cause on those, so we're gonna just put a split system in with the condenser out back. Probably put a little roof over that because that snow's coming off the back and it could fall down, but we'll put a roof over the condenser and probably a little something to keep the snow from piling up on it too much, cause we don't like things getting damaged from snow. And then, the gas meter too. I don't know if they were. We've been required before to put things around the gas meters, so we have little things that we build around the gas meters too. Usually they'll just have us put 2 bollards up, and then we can attach to those, you know, some Trex decking or whatever that looks good. Still does its job protecting the actual equipment.
We're looking at this one with the C1 where it has, yeah, the little. There are dumpster enclosures and.
Yeah, it looks like that's primarily for the dumpster in the northwest corner.
Yeah, and that dumpster enclosure is gonna be the 6-inch concrete walls,
Mhm.
and that'll be 6 feet tall, so I was thinking that that could match that back fence. You know, but if we can't put that back there, then we can just build up the dirt back there really good and make sure it drains towards us somehow.
Mhm. Overall, we're looking at the A 1.00 with the color photos and the materials. I think it looks nice. I like the beams a lot. I think that kind of ties in the neighboring buildings a bit. Not seeing metal siding which is our note to not allow.
It is. No metal siding.
Yeah, it was somewhere.
I mean, we can choose to allow it,
Oh,
but it's,
Highly just. All those new buildings down at the south end, like, oh, no siding, they look
Yeah.
good, but.
That was before Brian's time.
yeah. So no, personally, I like the colors and I like the design of the front.
Mhm.
Yeah, we like using logs, it's fun. Logs and rock is fun stuff. And it looks really good.
I would agree, I think it'd fit in well with other businesses.
Yeah, cause I read that code, Brian, that you put in there that it's supposed to. With the original town 1816 or what was that year?
1880 to 1910.
I was like, holy cow.
This is more like 19, maybe 15. But-
You know.
Just a few years off.
Yeah, I generally like the look of it. I don't have any concerns with the physical look.
I don't think I saw yet stuff about lighting, but that never seems to be a problem with downcast lighting,
Right.
right?
The interior up like in the front, southeast corner, instead of a. There's like a bench right there or something, we're gonna put it against the wall and do like a big wall. Sofa with some tables on that instead of that. Other piece.
Of the types of trees you guys are gonna use in this, right, it's not in the
They,
curving, right?
cedar.
Let's see.
Yeah, I called that the nursery. It's just 2 lots north or whatever. They said those would be the best trees. Cause they're not really tall and don't cause a mess.
Yeah, which, I would figure.
So there's dwarf mugo pines and dwarf emerald arrow pines.
Are these drought tolerant?
That's what they said at the next,
Okay.
yeah. But we'll have a drip system to them anyways.
Mhm. Yeah, they're pretty common. too.
That'll be nice for that parking lot. We'll,
Yeah.
have a little more mature on this.
Get rid of it.
I was wondering what was gonna go into that lot.
No, the head scratcher.
We're gonna try and get a coming soon sign up sometime soon, but. Gotta get a permit for that, I think.
Yep. I'm assuming signage comes at a later date. Do we need those details in this design review? Okay.
But a condition of approval says signs require a separate permit.
Yeah.
Okay, administrative, perfect.
Do I have any other questions?
Yeah.
I don't even, you guys could.
Mm-hmm. Brian, anything you think we've missed, or?
I don't believe so. Right, you sufficient information at this point?
Anything that's of concern, we'll definitely. Get it all fixed up with the civil engineer and.
Yeah. I think my main concern is just pedestrian and traffic flow. And I would definitely, I like all the, what you've proposed, but I would like something for us to look at to make sure. I have a solid yes, so just coming back with a better plan. Of what you have already suggested and maybe kind of what signage would be included or how the painting would ease any sort of confusion as people enter into the business. And then also just consider that this would now be one giant parking lot and how traffic may flow and how to prevent people from like cutting across kind of the inflow of traffic would be really helpful for me.
So would that be on, would we have to go on to another meeting in 2 weeks, or? Could I just do that with the civil engineering and turn it in?
I think what I would recommend is that you guys give Rye a list of things to bring back. For the next meeting, I will have findings prepared at that time so that it can be approved at that meeting, assuming everything is satisfactory.
Okay,
Yeah, probably I would like to see that and the snow storage, if that, or that back, of that back fence.
So retaining fence.
Yeah, is gonna look like,
Yeah, snow retaining fence and then. A topo, just so we can see that drainage would go onto the property and not cause. Issues to the houses to the west.
I'm just writing down.
is this sent out to the, 300 feet, joiners, this is not required,
Because it's not public hearing.
yeah, okay.
I think that's all on my list.
Snow retaining fence, topo, traffic plan.
Traffic pedestrian access.
Gotcha.
And then we can kind of get
See,
some numbers to that.
Estimated vehicle trips.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, estimated,
I think it was like 100 cars on, an hour. No, I screwed that up, never mind. Yeah.
You gotta do a quick vehicle study.
Yeah, I think that's a coffee every 36 seconds, if there was like one coffee per car. That's pretty fast.
that would be possible.
Yeah, like, I don't know, like, it's like
Station.
ordering, paying,
Yeah.
getting your drink, like,
Let's do
if
it.
you can do that, then you'll get a lot of
Yeah,
customers.
right.
We're gonna need a new traffic light.
Don't say, those are dirty words in this spot.
Yeah.
4 lanes around that. It'll do it.
Okay,
That'll be good.
well, guess that is a team motion then.
Are we moving to table it technically, or?
Yeah, I think that would be the appropriate motion since there's not a big person requirement, since it's not a public hearing. So it's table it to the next meeting.
I'll move to table the application for a design review submitted by, B&B Bellevue to the next. Planning and zoning commission meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay,
Brian, when? I need to get you this stuff just before that meeting sometime, or?
Give me a call tomorrow and
Okay,
go over the plan.
okay.
okay, is anyone, not available for meeting on July 7th?
I believe I should be good to go for that one.
7th, or we blacked out for the 30th.
30th is the fifth Monday of the month. It's like a
Ooh,
holiday right
free,
here.
free Monday, yeah, no, I'm here.
There's a chance I'm gonna be gone. But, I'm probably not available to call in.
I will definitely be here.
So yeah, maybe
3 weeks.
July 7th.
July
Okay.
7th.
touch base with these guys to see if one of them or both of them would be available in advance. Not have a forum. Okay, Great, if nothing else, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on Monday, June 16th.
Second,
All in favor?
I.
All right, motion passes. We're adjourned.
These guys.